Why coronavirus won't save the environment? You already know the story of how coronavirus took over the world. And as we are all forced to slow down to flatten the curve, news broke of how our air quality suddenly improved and how nature was recovering. But none of this had a significant impact on CO2 levels on a global and long-term scale. Nor will it be enough to permanently mitigate global warming. It's difficult to make a one-on-one comparison of two different crises, but the reactions of government to tackle a global emergency like the COVID-19 pandemic versus decades of global inaction to solve any equal life-threatening climate crisis is very telling of what is the reality. Many governments that failed to take actions on the climate crisis have responded fairly rationally to the COVID-19 virus. A threat to our lives was met with a countermeasure to contain the pandemic. The reason entire cities are now taking part in the total social shutdown is because we can all easily grasp the real immediate threat of the pandemic. The effects of the pandemic are tangible. We hear or see of persons being infected, getting sick, and in some cases even losing their lives. And yet climate change is already affecting our lives too. Perhaps if the climate crisis was featured more in the media like a dangerous disease, governments will take it just as seriously as the pandemic. But environmental problems are rarely covered by the media just as exhaustively despite their very high death tolls. The WHO estimates that 4.6 million people die every year prematurely from respiratory illnesses directly linked to air pollution. Patients with respiratory difficulties are now at greater risk of COVID-19 complication. In other words, the coronavirus outbreak has proven once and for all that there is a link between our economy and the health of our planet. The trouble with climate change is that so far it's not been felt by mostly wealthy societies. To date, climate change has mostly taken its toll on people who live in the developing world, like Guyana. Now, with a looming economic crisis resulting from the measures taken to contain the coronavirus, there is a danger that existing social inequalities will deepen after the pandemic is over. The fact that many governments reacted so drastically to the coronavirus outbreak proves that strong economies do have the structural, financial, and political ability to react quickly to a life-threatening crisis, and that our societies are capable and emphatic enough to make sacrifices for the common good. Now that we know what's possible, the pandemic actually gives us a unique and historical window of opportunity to make the structural changes needed to transition towards a fair and ecological sustainable economic system. This is where we as Guyanese need to be vigilant. As government try to keep economies alive, they might relax their environmental standards and return to how things were before the pandemic. Which industries are the Guyanese government planning to support? Should those industries receive money unconditionally? Government should not bail out companies that are adding to the climate crisis. Instead, government's money should be spent on 1. A carbon tax, 2. Business, and 3. Invest in renewable energy. One thing for sure, after COVID-19, our society will never be the same. This is not a bad thing because our pre-COVID life wasn't sustainable. So there is hope for things to be better since it seems like COVID has placed a pause on climate change. If we want this pause to be our new reality, here are some of the things you and I can do to learn more on the 6 climate positive actions prepared by the UN Secretary General. There are many things you can do online and in your community and even as an individual to take action. Continue to follow our pages and other active groups to know how. In the times of crisis, things may seem impossible to change, but whenever you think back on the COVID-19 crisis, remember these images of how the majority of us subjected ourselves to a lockdown and curfews for the common good, and how we found ways to make our support and our hope for better times to come.